Hello everyone, this is Cobalt. This is the next video in my character analysis series for Brawlhalla. Stick around till the end to hear about entering the giveaway to win community colors, emotes, weapon skins, sidekicks, avatars, or even the battle pass, and voting for the next legends. And if you want to skip all this and get straight into the information, there's a timestamp in the description, and don't forget to subscribe so you can keep up with the release of your favorite legend. In these analyses, I wanted to focus solely on the character's signatures. Light attack combos are covered much more in depth than I ever could elsewhere and function pseudo-comparably for all characters of that weapon class. So I'm not going to be discussing the general neutral of the character with their weapons unless it pertains in some way to their signatures. Firstly, I want to give clear descriptions of the terminology I'll be using. Startup frames are the amount of frames that happen after a move has begun until the first hitbox of the move becomes active. Active frames are the duration of frames that the move contains hitboxes that can collide with your opponent. FAF, or First Actionable Frame, is the first frame available where your character is able to move again after the move has been started. For all of this data, I use the character's jump to display the first actionable frame. Lastly, on miss refers to the move not connecting with an opponent, and on hit refers to the move making contact with an opponent. I'm going to be doing my analysis today on the next voted in legend, Dusk. Dusk was a master artificer who created the Great Golem army and led their assault on Asgard. Dusk was defeated and was thrown into the Elendil prison for 400 years. He crafted his Orb of Stone while he was in prison and used it to escape. He then attempted to take over the Feywild. Dusk's weapons are Spear and Orb. He hasn't really seen much competitive play since his introduction to Brawlhalla, though he does have weapons that are both pretty solid in the metagame right now. He has 6 attack, 7 dexterity, 4 defense, and 5 speed. This isn't a bad stat spread either, though a little lower on the defensive side. So is it his signatures that are holding him back from being super competitively viable, or are they able to benefit his kit? Well, let's find out. Let's start with his Spear. Spear's side sig has 22 frames of startup, active frames from 23 to 30 with an FAF of 49. It functions differently on miss than it does on hit. Should the move connect, it has a second hit with active frames from 39 to 51 with a new FAF of 69. Dusk swings his spear in front of him, and if it hits the opponent, he follows up with a secondary swing from his spear for a few frames. It has above average startup, but pretty good FAF honestly on miss. It offers him a solid option in front of him with some decent range to it as well, with the initial hitboxes offering just about the same range as Neutral Light or potentially a little more. Its startup isn't the best, but I think that it's a decent signature that offers him some reasonable utility in front of him. Spear Neutral Sig has 16 frames of startup, active frames from 17 to 24 with an FAF of 42. It functions differently on miss than it does on hit. Should the move connect, it functions as a command grab with a new FAF of 74. Dusk reaches his spear straight into the air, and if it connects with the opponent, Dusk pulls them down and whips them forward. It's an upward-reaching command grab that catches jumping opponents and those recovering high. It reaches straight upward, so it only catches opponents directly above him. It has decent startup and really good FAF. It just has limited utility on it due to its specific threat coverage. I like this sig quite a bit, actually. Spear Down Sig has 17 frames of startup, active frames from 18 to 25 with an FAF of 52. It functions the same on miss as it does on hit. Dusk plants his spear into the ground and makes it erupt from below a short distance away from him. It has slightly below average startup and FAF. It's got some utility for covering opponents at a particular distance, but only has hitboxes that extend straight upwards, so you'll definitely need to space it properly to be effective with it. I don't think it's a super great sig considering its limited threat coverage, but certainly does have some utility for mid-range spaced opponents. Next up is his Orb. Orb side sig has 13 frames of startup, active frames from 14 to 18 and 32 to 37 with an FAF of 53. It functions the same on miss as it does on hit. Dusk thrusts his orb forward, and then follows up with a second orb thrust. This sig has really fast startup and slightly below average FAF. It's got some utility to it directly in front of him thanks to its solid frame data and decent hitboxes. This is a solid signature in my opinion, offering him a solid burst option as well as punish option directly in front of him. Pretty useful, I think. Orb Neutral Sig has 13 frames of startup, active frames from 14 to 18 and 35 to 44 with an FAF of 55. It functions the same on miss as it does on hit. Dusk flings his orb upwards in front of him, and whenever it reaches the apex, there's a small additional group of hitboxes that burst forth from the orb. The Sig has pretty decent startup and slightly below average FAF. It catches grounded opponents as well as airborne ones, offering it dual coverage directly in front of him and above him. The additional hitboxes from the orb at the apex linger for a little bit as well, which could provide a little additional coverage if the opponent doesn't know the hitbox durations, and it can be a good conversion option if your opponent neutral dodges out of a downlight. Orb Down Sig has 18 frames of startup, active frames from 19 to 45 with an FAF of 60. It functions the same on miss as it does on hit. Dusk sends his orb soaring upward into the air and then slamming it downward. The Sig has okay frame data, average startup, and FAF. It has a decent amount of utility to it thanks to its ability to cover opponents above him and the downward slam catching opponents below him at a distance, making it a potentially useful edgeguarding option since it can spike or cover the ledge. And the end lag on it isn't terrible, but it's certainly punishable. It's an interesting SIG on his kit for sure, though its utility is limited. So, overall his SIGs are pretty good in terms of their frame data. All but 2 of his SIGs have below average startup and FAF, which is pretty dang good. His Orb side SIG and neutral SIGs have really good startup, coverage, and decent FAF. His Spear neutral SIG has really low FAF as well, which makes it really useful on miss. I think his SIGs have decent coverage, but the thing about them is that I don't think that the hitboxes on them are very large. His Spear SIGs have very linear hitboxes that have very specific spacing, so they don't really catch opponents much in terms of their horizontal reach. The Orb SIGs have a similar problem to me where the hitboxes are, I'm going to say, not very generous. I think that his signatures probably hold him back a little bit in terms of his competitive viability, honestly, which is a shame considering he was the first Orb Legend, and I think that he has a really interesting character design. Today's code to put down in the comments is Overlord, along with your Twitter handle or social media of your preference. And if you get that reference, I appreciate it. Also, feel free to check out my Twitch channel. I'll be streaming 1v1 battles with viewers later this week, so come say hello. The channel will be linked down in the description. Tune in tomorrow for coverage on the highest voted legend from this week. I'll be continuing this once a day, Monday through Friday, over the next 10 weeks until all 50 legends are covered. So, thanks for joining me on this ride. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the release of your favorite legend, and hope to see you back for the next one. Once again, I'm Cobalt, and thanks for watching.